Hello, St. John the Evangelist School fifth graders for the school year 2020 to 2021. I'm Mr. Robert LaBeouf, and I will have the pleasure of being your math teacher. I have a plan for a little bit of summer work just to help us get ready for fifth grade math. I plan 3 installments. Hopefully you're watching this one around the end of June, early July. And then I plan another one for mid-July and then another one for early August. This first installment is going to focus on the multiplication facts. I'd like to go through the papers that I have provided for you along with this video, give a little explanation of each one. The first is a timed test. There are 100 facts. I decided to be comprehensive. I decided to include 0 and 1, even though they're easy. And I also decided to include, for example, not only 3 times 4, but 4 times 3. You could make an argument based on the commutative property of multiplication that only one of those was necessary. But I decided for the time test to have all 100. All 100, because if you think about it, here's a little math lesson. You've got 10 digits. 0 through 9 is 10 digits. So there's 0 times 0, 0 times 1, 0 times 2, all the way to 0 times 9, and that's 10 facts. Then you move on to 1. 1 times 0, 1 times 1, 1 times 2, all the way to 1 times 9. And there are 10 digits, and each of the 10 digits has 10 facts. So that's 100 facts altogether. I wanted to get it all on one sheet of paper. So the font is not huge, but I didn't want the font to be too small. So as a result, there are no equal signs. That would have filled the paper up too much, I thought. But you don't need an equal sign. You can just write the answer to each one right next to it. The first one that you see is 9 times 2. So just write fairly small and 18 right next to it. And when you're going through this timed test, don't try to go super fast. Go at a reasonable pace so that you feel that you're getting them all right, but do try to go somewhat quickly because speed is important. Whenever we're learning the facts, whether it's addition facts or multiplication facts, first is accuracy, of course, but then speed is important because we need to get these facts into our long-term brains so that we have instant recall, because in the future, when you're involved in a more complex math problem, if you have to stop and think what 9 times 6 is, you might get lost in the overall problem. So this is an important foundational skill to move on in mathematics. Another sheet that you have that I've provided is the answer key to the timed test. Now, speaking of results, I took this myself just yesterday on June 15th. And you might be happy to know that I got them all right. That should give you some confidence that in me as your teacher. And it took me just under 2 minutes, about 1 minute and 58 seconds. Use a stopwatch when you're doing it. You know, the modern phones have a nice stopwatch feature. And I would guess that you should probably be able to do this in, say, 3 minutes or less. If you're spending much more than that, if you're going more than 4 minutes, maybe you need to learn the facts a little bit better. As far as accuracy is concerned, if you can get this done in, say, 2.5 to 3 minutes, and then you notice you made one silly mistake, don't worry about it. We all do that. Use your judgment as to how many times you want to take this timed test. And if you're not doing really well, say, within 3 minutes, the next paper I've provided for you is a list of facts. Now, this one is not comprehensive. This is one that you're going to practice from. You're going to use it to practice if necessary. I did not include 0 or 1 in here. And I took account of the commutative property of addition. to just limit the number of facts to study. I start with 9 times 9 here and go all the way to 9 times 2, and that's a total of 8 facts. But then when I got to the 8s, I did not include 8 times 9 because that was covered with the 9 times 8. So the 8s have one fewer fact. And it continues like that all the way to the 2s. The only fact you need to learn for the 2s is 2 times 2 because all the higher ones are included before. And then there is a 2-page instruction sheet for this to go along with this multiplication facts practice page. 2 pages of instructions. The nuts and bolts instructions of how to use the multiplication facts practice sheet are only a small portion of this. The rest of this 2-page instruction sheet is some future math that I couldn't resist providing for you now. But let's talk about the nuts and bolts of how to use this sheet right here. Have this in front of you for reference. Take a piece of white line paper, and on the first line write 9 times 9 equals 81, and 81 divided by 9 equals 9. When the 2 digits are the same, like 9 times 9, you're only going to have 2 facts. Then go to the second line of the white line paper and do 9 times 8. Write 9 times 8 equals 72, 8 times 9 equals 72, 72 divided by 9 is 8, and 72 divided by 8 is 9. You'll get 4 facts, 2 multiplications, 2 divisions, when you have when the two digits are different. And what I strongly recommend you do, especially if you feel you need this, you know, if you did really well on the time test and you want to just improve a little bit, use your judgment as to how many times you're going to practice and how deeply you're going to get into the practice. That's going to depend on the individual, and hopefully your parents can give you some guidance about that. But what I recommend is that when you're writing out these facts, you say them. Now, don't worry about looking silly. I talk to myself a lot. It's only a problem if you talk back. That's just a silly joke. Don't be afraid to say them out loud. The more of your senses you get involved in the process, you're going to be looking at the facts, you're going to be writing, so your hand is going to be involved. And if you say the fact as you're writing it, you're saying it, you're hearing it, you're looking at it, you're writing it, and that's going to help solidify that fact into your long-term memories. These instructions are on these pages here. You don't have to remember them. I would ask that every student, no matter how well you know the multiplication facts, go through this process with the practice paper at least once. Maybe even if you do really well on the time test and you go through the practice process of writing and saying all the facts out, then maybe you'll do even better the next time on the time test. Now, a little bit of a word about the rest of these 2 pages. Like I said, I couldn't resist getting into some additional math. Now, I talked about earlier that when you're doing the multiplication practice sheet here, there are no zeros and ones. The thing about 0 and 1 with multiplication is we can dispense with those, with multiplying by 0 or 1 with a general rule, 2 general rules, one for each. And this is where I took the opportunity to introduce you to some of the middle school and high school and beyond symbolism that we use in math, and that involves letters. Right? Now, a word about letters. You probably have some awareness that as you go on in math, you're going to encounter letters. My number one message for you now at this point is please do not be intimidated or nervous about that. There's an old saying that if something walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck, right? These letters are going to walk like numbers, talk like numbers. Guess what? They are numbers. The fact that we use letters allows us to say things in general about how numbers work. And of course, they play a big role in 7th and 8th grade math, where we get you ready for high school math. Actually, in most of the 8th graders here at St. John's take a full high school Algebra 1 course, where, of course, there are a lot of letters in the field of algebra. We want to sometimes find out what the letter really is. What number do we put where the letter is to get a true statement? That's solving an algebra equation. We'll do a little bit of that in 5th grade and a lot more in 6th and continuing on. But for now, what we're going to do with letters is we're going to say, let's take a letter, let's say A. Let A be any number. So the letter A stands for any number whatsoever. And if we do that, look at what we can say in relation to multiplication. A is any number. 0A equals 0. And 1A equals A. Now, to any student 7th grade or above, that's going to look very familiar to them. At this point, you might be wondering, though, why is that multiplication? When you have 0 and then an A right next to it, why is that multiplication? It is multiplication. And this 1A means 1 times A. Well, here's a nice message about the symbolism of math. It's been developed through the years to be simple. It doesn't take much getting used to. You'll be used to this very soon. If you have a number and a letter right next to each other, it's a multiplication. We don't need to write an X there. We just agree that it's a multiplication. Whoops, the lights went out. There we go. I have to be more in motion when I'm making math videos so the lights stay on. Also, if 2 letters are right next to each other, like you have an A and then a B right next to it, that's also A times B. We just agree we won't write the X. We'll still use the X for times in 5th grade, but more and more as you go on, you're going to see this rule being displayed here. So this is 0 times A equals 0, and 1 times A equals A, and A can be any number. Of course, when you were younger, you learned this rule here as 0 times anything is 0. Well, it still says that. We're not changing the rule that you already knew. We're just writing it in a different way. And this rule is, you already know it as 1 times a number is the number. Well, that's exactly what this says, except in the simple symbolism of math that we start to learn in the middle school grades. By the way, addition has similar facts to this. I'm assuming that everybody's good with the addition facts. I hope that's true. But if A is any number, well, let's say this. Let's say A and B are any number. Bring 2 letters in there, 2 numbers, A and B. As far as addition is concerned, we have A plus 0 equals A. Now, let's see, here we do need the plus sign. Mathematicians have not come up with a way to eliminate the plus sign. We still have to write that. And also, if you have A plus B, that's the same as B plus A. This, of course, is known as the commutative property of addition. And there's also a commutative property of multiplication, to get back to multiplication again. And remember what I said before. We can simply write AB to mean A times B, and that's going to be equal to B times A. AB equals BA. This is the commutative property of multiplication. And there's a little bit more on this 2-page introduction to the practice paper. Only a small portion of it's the actual directions for using the practice paper, writing on the white line paper, and so on. The rest of it is some neat math that This is some of it. There's a little bit more. I even close this two-page instruction sheet with a question for you to consider. I'll be happy for you to send me your reply or ask me a question about it, and I'll reply to that. I would like to be able to establish a dialogue with you during the course of these summer assignments as well as during the regular school year. That's what math should be. So now I'd like to make a few closing words of advice about my approach to teaching math in general. With the 20 to 21 school year, I'll be beginning my 22nd year of teaching grades 5 through 8 math here at St. John's, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. I have a pretty good idea what the 6th grade math teacher is going to want you to know. So, and the 7th grade and the 8th grade, I've known that teacher my whole life. So everything that I do in 5th grade is going to be with an eye to the future. And this is how it should be in math. Everything we learn in math should be useful down the road. There should be some purpose to what we learn to allow us to answer more interesting and challenging questions in the future. Math is what's called incremental, comes in increments or steps. More than any other subject, it builds on what comes before. So please, throughout the course of 5th grade math and for the rest of your lives, try not to miss any of those steps. If you're studying history, now history is wonderful. Please don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to slight history. But if you're learning about one culture and one time period in the fall, and then in the spring you're learning about an entirely different time period and culture, and there may be some general things that historians say about cultures, but for the most part it's going to be different facts, different people, different dates, different things that happen, different themes even. But in math, what we're going to do in the spring is going to depend heavily on what we do in the fall, and what we do in 6th grade will depend heavily on what we do in 5th grade. So please keep that in mind and take each of those steps. Next thing I want to say about the learning of math. I see my job as being primarily about the question why, not so much about how. Here's a word for the parents who I hope are watching. You may recall from middle school math that to divide by a fraction, we flip and multiply. Well, here's some good news. That hasn't changed. And it never does. Getting back to history, sometimes things in history change, you know, or facts about geography, tallest building in the world. Some of that information can change. We get new history added all the time. And there's really not going to be new math added to middle school math. You know, mathematicians are developing new math, but it's not going to be related to middle school math. So I lost my train of thought. Usually when I'm in the middle of a math problem, that doesn't happen. But here's where I was. The how has not changed about dividing by a fraction. And the why hasn't changed either, but you may not have been properly told, you parents, when you were young. Why do we flip and multiply? I'm going to explain that to 5th graders. That's my job, is to teach the why. If students can appreciate the why, it'll be easier to remember the how and get correct answers and be a better math student. It'll also be more enjoyable. If you're doing things not just because I told you to, although every teacher wants and enjoys when the students do what the teacher asks, but in addition to that, I want you to believe in what you're doing, to create the story for yourself. You create the story of math for yourself with my guidance, and when it all makes sense to you, it'll be a much more enjoyable experience and you will do better. And a final word to parents. I would love, to the extent that you can, that you accompany your child on the math journey that we'll take together. Look at my videos together. As far as this first assignment is concerned, particularly these 2 pages, which contain some of the math that's going to be important later on in 5th grade and beyond. Read this together. Try to talk it over together, parents and children, and that could be a great experience for you. And maybe you can involve me and then send me a message, and I'll reply back, and we can all talk about the math. That's what I would like to happen. This new technology for me, it was this really challenging time that we've just gone through at the end of this school year. I became a YouTube videoer. Didn't think back in January that I would ever be doing that, but necessity, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, they say, and I moved on to this new way of communicating with students, and we're all going to be back together someday, and I miss that, and that's very enjoyable to be together with the students learning. But I'm going to continue with this because it's permanent. You can, go back and redo this video. If the student's absent, the student can look at this video. I'll hopefully probably make it available for a long time, and it'll be another way for us to explore math together. And I would urge you parents, as much as you can, to take part in that journey. So I guess that's about it for now. Let me know what you think about this first installment. Tell me about your progress. Maybe answer the question that I posed at the end of this 2-page instruction sheet. And 2 more installments is my plan. And we'll have a good time. Enjoy the summer. See you next time.